Hi, welcome to the Minimalist EDC. My name is Chris, and today we are going to do a disassembly and maintenance on a Benchmade Mini Adamas. So I got the Mini Adamas the other day, and I haven't done much with it yet. I haven't taken it apart, so this will be an adventure we get to take together. I did notice when I first got it that the pivot is a little stiff. The first couple flicks there somewhere were failing a little bit, and it's not the free-flowing smooth action I expect out of my Benchmade. So we're going to take it apart. We're going to put a little bit of pivot lube in there and into the washers and see if we can't get this thing firing perfectly. So with the Mini Adamas, we are going to have T6 screws on the body and the clip, and T6 screws in the thumb studs, and T8 on the pivot. So we'll get our old friends here, the T6 and the T8. And if you're interested in the tools I'm using, you check the link below. There should be some links to where these can be attained. So we're going to start with the, let's go with the body, why not? So we're going to take a few things off the body real quick. I usually start with the show side. And I am not sure if they use thread locker on this. Let's take a look. Nope, it looks to be clean. So we're just going to go ahead and pop these little screws out. And actually, I am seeing a little bit in the threads, so they may have a little bit of light thread locker in this guy. And as I noted on my initial impressions video, you can watch that as well on my channel, this Benchmade is kind of unique. They have the pivot. The screw for it is not on the show side. So like on the bug out, the pivot to access it is on the show side, whereas it's not on this model. So we'll flip it over and grab a T8, get in there. There we go. It's got a little bit of a turn. Ooh, it's a big screw compared to some of the other ones. And then I'm just going to try to pop that right out. May need another smaller one. Usually with these you can pull the lock bar down and the pivot should just pop right out. This one's fighting me. There it goes. Just have a little more force than I thought. I didn't want to damage it. And so you see it is a captured pivot. So what that means is you're going to have a round with a flat side here where the flat side can't turn. So when you put it into the D-shaped hole, then it catches and won't allow it to free spin. So slowly take this guy out and see what we got. All right. So we have the CPM crew wear blade with, I'm guessing these are phosphor bronze washers. Yep. And then I'm going to take this scale off, see what we got underneath it. Scale's G10, the liners are steel. It is solidly well built. And this is all I care to take it apart at this point in time. I mean, you can take it more apart if you wanted to service the Omega springs or get into the mechanism, but the mechanism is working fine as is. What I want to deal with is the pivot. So we're going to use some KBL knife pivot lube. But first, we're going to clean it up a little bit because I can see some gunk in the pivot already. So I believe I'm the first owner of this knife. I bought it from a little, not a pawn shop, but a one of those, we sell used guns and knives places, and it was in their case forever, and they gave me a really good deal on it because I don't think anyone was coming in there buying high-end knives. So let's just take a little bit of rubbing alcohol and we're going to shine up this washer real good. You shouldn't have to worry about getting them like shiny, but I do want to get any any gunk that is accumulated on them off. And then you can see the blade looks like it has a little bit of copper infused or coated on it. I've never seen that before on a Benchmade at least, but I imagine it provides a really good surface for the bronze washer to flow upon. Well, let's see. Yeah, that looks good. So we're just going to dry it off. And dry off the washers. And then the fun part begins where we get these all back in, which there are multiple ways to do this. I saw this method on Nick Shabazz's channel one time, and I rather like it. So essentially what we're going to do is basically build this back. And the surface tension from the oil is going to hold the washer in place with a little bit of tension. Not a lot, but it will cause it to stick. There we are. And so as I take my finger and hold it there, I'm going to add oil to this side. And then I'm going to put a little bit back here where the lock bar engages, just so that that is a little bit smoother, and a little bit back here. I'm sorry, this is where the lock bar engages. The other side is for the lockup when it is fully locked. And then put that there. And the trick is, I'm sure I'm going to mess this up on camera, but you take the springs, pull them down, and slowly, while you hold the washers in place, slide this whole mechanism in. And then with any tools that you might have that are small and precision, just kind of reach into the pivot and pull everything to where it needs to go. So you're trying to get, I might have to change hands, but trying to get everything to line up so you have access back to that pivot hole. Yeah, there we go. And so I kind of just work in a circular motion to get everything kind of pushed around and in place. And then this may actually make it easier because I'm working from the top of it. You find your pivot and the D-shaped hole that was created there. And the goal is to kind of just work it back in there. So I'm gonna flip it over so I can see what I'm doing from the other side and kind of keep tension on it with my middle finger on the back side. So, and this is kind of a trial and error. So I got it past the first washer. I could feel it click, and there it goes. Perfect. That was a lot easier than I expected. So we have our pivot screw, and I am going to use a slight bit of Loctite to keep it where it needs to be. So you don't need very much, just a very tiny amount. And always use the blue Loctite. The red stuff is permanent and will damage your knife. So we got that guy in there. All right. And then we're going to adjust that later. I just wanted to get it semi-tight to make sure. Then, you know what? We made a mistake. The scale is going to, in this configuration, the way that this Adamas is, and that's why we're doing it live. I see the scale is milled out with a recess for the pivot. So you get to watch my mistake so you don't make it yourself. This is so all I'm doing is I'm going to hold it as tight as I can, because when I pull this out, I don't want the blade or the washers to move around all that much, because I got them exactly where I want them. So I'm going to try to do this as gingerly as possible. And I'm grabbing the show side scale. I'm placing that back on there. I'm going to get that just set in place. To avoid moving this around as much as possible, I am going to leave the other screws out and try to get this pushed through, and I'll get those other body screws in at the end. So it has wiggled and moved, so not optimal, but what can you do? I found one interesting thing already. Is in this configuration, and this is something I've not encountered on other Benchmades, so we're learning together. I'm going to pull this back off. The D-shaped hole that we talked about is not present on the scale. So normally I use that as a visual guide to figure out where I'm putting the pivot back in, but I can't see it. So as you can see right here, the D shape is pointing down and over towards the omega spring. So just kind of take note of that. Know where you're working towards, and it won't be too bad. But you see, even as someone who's taken apart literally hundreds of knives, sometimes they can surprise you. Give you a little twist on an old favorite. So I'm going to point the D flat side toward the omega springs and kind of wiggle it a little bit. Turn it over so I can see what I'm doing. The first challenge is always getting it past that very first washer. Once you do that, it's usually a whole lot easier to get everything else to come together for you and in where it's needed. So let me all right. Through the magic of editing, I didn't want you to sit while I fumbled through it, so I moved forward in time a little bit. I also found out a little trick that actually made that a whole lot easier in the end that I'll talk about in just a second. So I got the scale on and I got the pivot in. So I'm going to get that bad boy tightened down. Said, all right, great. And so the trick I'm talking about is I took the blade completely out with the washers, put the pivot into the scale, and then placed the pivot and scale together to find the angle, the perfect angle for that D-ring to fit into the hole. Took the whole thing off, put my blade and washers back in, and then once I have the pivot preset at the right angle, I placed it on top and then pinched it together, and it all fit together pretty easily. So, you know, live and learn, figure out little tips and tricks for each knife, and so this one's no exception. So we're going to go back to our T6s, get them in there. I'm not going to Loctite the T6s because I may take this apart to do a little more maintenance on it later if I'm not quite happy with the results of of the lubrication that I just did. So I'm not going to lock them in just yet. You can always pop them out at any point in time, put a little Loctite and stick them back. And the blue Loctite comes out pretty easily once it dries anyway, so it's not a big deal. And when you're going in, make sure you just don't cross thread them. I felt a little resistance, so if you ever feel resistance on a screw on a knife, just back it out just slightly until you feel it pop, and then you can go right back in. So you definitely don't want to cross thread your screws. So, all right, let's figure out what we did here. All right, it's way too tight. So we're going to back that off a little bit. Oh yeah. Before I did this, getting it to fall close on a flick was 50-50 at best. Now we are good. I don't know if we're in middle flick territory yet, and it may need to still work. Oh, we can do it. Yeah. Work the pivot a little bit. And when you saw me oiling that bar earlier, what that actually is this area right here when I was talking about the lock bar interface. So if you can, I'm going to try to get to see right here. As the axis lock interacts with this and the bar goes up and down it, A lot of times when they're new, you feel a very gritty experience as you pull that bar down, as it's scraping the metal, and as you break a Benchmade in, those two surfaces get really flat and smooth. But also, just a drop of oil in there really helps out with the action of that axis lock and being able to pull it down and whip it back out. So I think we're good. Very happy with the results of that. It only took me, I'd say about 5 minutes of off-camera time to figure out that little trick with the scale, and after that, very, very easy. But yeah, Benchmades aren't, Mega Springs and Benchmades and their axis locks aren't the easiest knives to work on that I've ever experienced, but they're not that bad. With a little bit of experience, you learn their tips and tricks. But thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. A like and subscribe would definitely help me grow this community. And if you're interested, check me out on Instagram. I post knife photos daily and weekly. So thanks so much for your time, and have a great day.